So in the last class, we have studied about the important life processes, that is about the nutrition, right? So completely we studied about the nutrition, how the nutrition takes place in the plants, and about the human nutrition we have studied, right? So I hope you have watched the videos so that I have uploaded in the YouTube. Okay, so today I'm going to continue the next part of this chapter. Okay, so today I'm going to start with the next life process, that is the respiration. Okay, so are you able to see the screen? Please, anybody confirm that? Please tell me yes or no. Okay, yes. So today we are going to study about the respiration. That is one of the important life process that takes place in the human body and the living organisms, both in the human body and the living organisms, right? So respiration, commonly how do you define the respiration? That is the taking in the oxygen and giving out the carbon dioxide, right? So that is the simple definition of the respiration. But what is the function of that carbon dioxide, or what is the function of that oxygen that is taken inside our body? So carbon dioxide is not required for our body, that is expelled from our body, right? But what is the function of that oxygen that is taken inside our body? That oxygen that is used to break down the glucose. So glucose that is taken from the nutrition process, right? So various nutrients that are taken into our body by the nutrition process. So that nutrients, they will break down by the presence of the oxygen. The oxygen that is able to break down the glucose, and it will convert the glucose into energy, and carbon dioxide is also released in that process. But this respiration process, the breakdown of the glucose, so that it takes place in different types in the different organisms. So what I am explaining here, the different organisms, they are able to break down the glucose in a different method. So some use the oxygen for the breakdown of the glucose, and some they are not needed the oxygen for the breakdown of the glucose. Okay, so there are two different types of the respiration. Okay, first type is the anaerobic respiration. So what do you mean by anaerobic respiration? Anaerobic respiration means in the first step, so glucose already taken into our body through the nutrition process, right? The glucose is there in our body, right? So that is the 6 carbon molecule. The glucose is containing the 6 C6, right? So C6H12O6, that is the formula of the glucose, right? So there are 6 carbon molecules are there. So in the first step of the respiration, the glucose molecule break down into a pyruvate. So pyruvate is the 3 carbon molecule. So that contain the 3 carbon molecules. So this process takes place in the cytoplasm. Anaerobic respiration, the first step is glucose break down into a pyruvate molecule, and it takes place in the cytoplasm. And in the next step, this pyruvate that will convert into carbon dioxide and ethanol. Ethanol is the that is the alcohol, right? So this alcohol and carbon dioxide is released by dividing the pyruvate. So this process takes place in the absence of the oxygen. So oxygen is not required for this process. So it is called as an anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration that takes place commonly in the yeast during the fermentation process. So this is totally called as a anaerobic respiration. So first step is breakdown of the glucose into a pyruvate, and it takes place in the cytoplasm, and the pyruvate that converts into ethanol and carbon dioxide and energy that is also released in this process. And for this process, there is no requirement of the oxygen. So it is called as a anaerobic respiration, right? So this breakdown of the pyruvate into the ethanol and carbon dioxide takes place in the mitochondria. Okay. So this is what anaerobic respiration. So next is the, I hope this topic is clear. Anaerobic respiration means oxygen is not required for the breakdown of the glucose. Next is the, so watch this picture. So here yeast is taken. So that glucose that is used for by the yeast, and ethanol and carbon dioxide is released. So it is represented in a equation. Okay. So next is the aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, so same. The first step is breakdown of the glucose into a pyruvate. So glucose is the 6 carbon molecule, and that will break down into a pyruvate in the cytoplasm. And this pyruvate molecule, so the pyruvate molecule, so that convert into what? Carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide and water. So that is called as a aerobic respiration. Why it is called as a aerobic respiration? Because so this process takes place in the presence of the oxygen. So which process? The breakdown of the glucose into a pyruvate, and pyruvate will convert into a carbon dioxide, and the one more product is water, and large amount of energy is also released in this process. Okay. So this process takes place in the presence of the oxygen. So it is called as a aerobic respiration. So in this process, so the large amount of energy is released compared to the anaerobic process. Okay. Students, don't do anything, just watch the class. Okay. So don't do anything on the screen. Yes. I hope this is aerobic respiration is clear. So sometimes what happens in our body? So in a human body, aerobic respiration will take place. Means for the breakdown of the glucose, there is a requirement of the oxygen, right? But in the lower organism, there is no requirement of the oxygen. For example, yeast. But in our body, some cells, they perform the anaerobic respiration. So which cells they are able to perform the anaerobic respiration? So in our muscle cells. So muscle cells, they are able to perform the which process? Anaerobic respiration process. So what happens in the muscle cell? So same, glucose that breaks down into pyruvate, and pyruvate convert into a lactic acid. So this is also anaerobic respiration, but it takes place in the human body, especially in the muscle cells. So remaining all cells, they perform the aerobic respiration, but these muscle cells, sometimes they are able to perform the anaerobic respiration. But what is the product? So they release the lactic acid as a product. So this lactic acid, so that is able to cause some cramps in our body. Okay, so this is also a type of the anaerobic respiration. So here, so the three types of the respiration means aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, both in the muscle cells and the in yeast, represented here. So just observe this schematic representation of the three types of the different respiration. Okay. So here just observe this schematic representation. Here first molecule is the glucose, right? So that is the nutrient that is taken by the digestive system, right? So this glucose that has the 6 carbon molecule and it will convert into pyruvate. So that is the 3 carbon molecule, and small amount of energy is also released. So this process that takes place in the cytoplasm. Please concentrate. So for multiple choice question, so this is very important. Glucose that converts into pyruvate, so in the cytoplasm for both aerobic and the anaerobic respiration. First step is conversion of the glucose into a pyruvate molecule. Okay, then so see the first step in the anaerobic respiration. So here in the absence of the oxygen in the yeast, so what is the products formed here? Ethanol, carbon dioxide, and the energy is formed. So here the energy released is very less. So what are the products? Ethanol, that is the alcohol, and carbon dioxide, and energy is released, right? So one more type is the aerobic respiration. So this is the aerobic respiration that takes place in the presence of the oxygen. So here it takes place in the mitochondria. And what is the products are formed here? Carbon dioxide, water, and energy is released. So this is very important. And sometimes I explained. So what I explained? So sometimes in our body, the muscle cells, they are able to perform the anaerobic respiration. But here, the first step is same, glucose convert into pyruvate. But the next step, that is, so in the absence of the oxygen, so muscle cells, so they perform the activity and form the lactic acid and the energy. So these are the different types of the respiration. So anaerobic respiration that we can observe in the yeast, in the lower organisms, and aerobic respiration commonly takes place in the human beings. Okay. So this is about the aerobic and the anaerobic respiration. So if you have any doubts, you can ask. Okay. So here, one of the important question is, write the difference between the aerobic and the anaerobic respiration. So this question is asked many times in your board exam. Okay, so this is the very important question. And so here you have to concentrate what are the products formed in the aerobic and the anaerobic respiration. So that is also very important. So you know that respiration. So respiration is the taking in the oxygen from the environment and giving out the carbon dioxide, right? So that I explained. So you know that the terrestrial organisms, they use the oxygen. So oxygen is available in the atmosphere. So they use that oxygen and give out the carbon dioxide. Then what about the animals, organisms which are living in the water? What about them? What they are able to do? How they are able to do the respiration process? So I hope you know the answer. The organisms which are living in the water, so they are using the dissolved oxygen. Oxygen is present in the water in the dissolved form. Okay, so they are using that oxygen for their respiration. But the dissolved oxygen is very less for that organisms. So the organisms which are living in the water, they get very less oxygen for their respiration process compared to the terrestrial organisms. Terrestrial organisms, they get more oxygen compared to the organisms which are present in the water. They are called as the aquatic organisms, right? So this is how the respiration takes place in the fish. So water flows into the mouth of the fish. So the water which containing the oxygen. So oxygen is present in the water in the dissolved form, right? So the oxygen that flows into the mouth of the fish, then it passes into the gills. The gills, the oxygen taken and transferred to the blood, and the remaining water flows from the body. So this is how the gills are used for the respiration in fish. You know that fishes, they use the gills for the respiration, right? So these gills that helps for the absorption of the oxygen from the water, right? So different organisms, they evolve the different types of the organs for their respiration. So some terrestrial organisms, they also evolve the different types of the respiration method, right? But humans, they contain the lungs, right? Totally it is called as the respiratory system for the respiration. So lungs are the respiratory organ present in the humans. So now we are going to study about the human respiratory system. So what it contains and what is the function of the human respiratory system. So I hope you know about the human respiratory system. So using the respiratory system, human beings take in the air. So air is present. So air means oxygen. So oxygen is present in the atmosphere, right? So from the atmosphere, the oxygen is taken into our body, to our lungs, right? So externally, our body contain the nostrils, right? So these nostrils, so they help for the transfer of the oxygen to the lungs. So these nostrils, they contain some fine hairs and line of and contain the some mucus inside the nostril. So in our body, there are nostrils, so which take in the oxygen from the atmosphere, right? So these nostrils, they contain the fine hair like structures. So here you can observe so these are the nostrils. So nose outside, so it contains the nostrils. So these nostrils contain the hair like structures, and it is lined by the mucus. So what is the functions of these hairs and the mucus? So it is commonly present in all human beings, right? These hair-like structures, and externally you can observe these hairs and the mucus. So you can feel the presence of these hairs and the mucus inside your nostrils. So these nostrils, so they help to filtrate the air. So in the air, some dust particles and microorganisms will be there. So these dust particles, some of that dust particles and microorganisms are filtered here. So it trap the microorganisms, and filtered air is transferred to the next part of the respiratory system. Okay, so this is how the hairs and mucus in the nostrils helps for the respiration. So next, through the nostrils, the air passes through the throat, then into the lungs. So just observe this picture. So through the nasal passage, the air passes through the pharynx and larynx, then it passes through the trachea. So this ring-like structure, pipe-like structure, that is surrounded by the ring-like structure, right? So this trachea, so that is also called as a windpipe, right? So this air passes through this trachea, and this trachea, so that will become to branch. So that is called as a bronchi. So just observe this picture here. So this is the trachea. So rings of cartilage are arranged on the trachea, and this trachea become branched, and these two branches are called as bronchi. Okay, and this bronchi again become small branches, and they are called as bronchioles. Here it is mentioned bronchioles, and these bronchioles ends with the some bag like structure that is called as a alveoli. So just concentrate on the diagram. So trachea, that will become, yes. So that trachea, so that will become two branch, that is called as a bronchi. Bronchi is the structure. So where the trachea will become two branch. Okay. So this function of the bronchi is, so that helps to the passage of the air into the lungs, right? So air is passing through this trachea and bronchi. Okay, so this bronchi again become bronchioles. Bronchioles ends with the bag like structure, so that is called as a alveoli. Okay, so these alveoli, they are called as air bags. So our lungs, they contain the alveoli. So here the expanded structure of the alveoli is given here. So alveoli. So this is how bronchioles ends with the alveoli. Okay. So here also you can observe the passage that divides into smaller and smaller tubes finally terminate into balloon like structure. They are called as a alveoli. Okay, so these alveoli, they contains the extensive network of the blood vessels. So what is the function of this alveoli? Alveoli is very important structure in our respiratory system. Why it is very important? Just concentrate here. So here, these alveoli, they contain the extensive network of the blood vessels. So these blood vessels, they are carrying the blood from the heart, right? So here, the exchange of the oxygen and carbon dioxide will takes place in the alveoli. It is very important. So next, in the next step, we are going to study about the transportation. So in the transportation, so this point is very important. So in the alveoli, the exchange of the gases will takes place because it contains the extensive network of the blood vessels. So here the many blood vessels are arranged on the alveoli, and in the alveoli what is there? So already we have taken in the oxygen, right? Oxygen is reached the alveoli. Now the alveoli contain the oxygen, right? So these blood vessels, they are carrying the carbon dioxide containing blood. Okay, so from our body, the carbon dioxide containing blood reaching the alveoli. So here the carbon dioxide is not needed for our body, right? So carbon dioxide is produced during the cellular activities. During the breakdown of the glucose, carbon dioxide is produced, right? So here that carbon dioxide is not needed for our body. It is a waste product. So that should be eliminated. So how it is eliminated from our body? So this carbon dioxide that get mixed with the blood. So that blood that is moving to the lungs, in the lungs, especially alveoli. So in the alveoli, so this alveoli remove the oxygen, diffuse the oxygen to the blood vessels, and the carbon dioxide that diffuse into the alveoli. So this is how exchange of the gases takes place. I hope you are understanding. Here inside the alveoli, oxygen is there, so that is from the environment, and inside the blood vessel, so the blood that is carrying the carbon dioxide. So this carbon dioxide that should be eliminated from our body, right? So how it is get eliminated from our body? So there is an exchange of the carbon dioxide and the oxygen takes place. Alveoli transfer the oxygen to the blood, and the blood that transfer the carbon dioxide to the alveoli through the diffusion process. Okay, so here the blood will get oxygenated, means the oxygen is carrying to the cells through the blood, and the waste product, that is the carbon dioxide, that is present in the alveoli. Again, from the alveoli, it moves to the bronchi, trachea, and the nasal passage, and it comes out from our body. So this is how the respiration takes place in our body. Okay. So first thing, what you should know, the what we breathe in, oxygen, so that is used for the cellular activities to break down the glucose, that you know. to break down the glucose, there is a requirement of the oxygen. So when the glucose breakdowns, there is a release of the carbon dioxide. So that carbon dioxide that should be eliminated from our body, right? So carbon dioxide is the waste product. So the carbon dioxide again carried by the blood to the lungs, So which place? Especially to the alveoli. So in the alveoli, so there is a oxygen diffuse into the blood, and the carbon dioxide present in the blood, so that moves to the alveoli. So again, the carbon dioxide come out from the respiratory system. So that will move to the bronchi, then trachea, then into the nasal passage. Okay, so this is how respiration takes place in the human body. Okay, so this is very important. So if you have any doubt, you can ask. Otherwise, I will move to the next part of this chapter. Okay. So when we breathe in, so just breathe in and breathe out. So you can feel there is a expansion of your chest region, right? So your diaphragm, so that will become flattened during the, when you take the oxygen in, your diaphragm become straight, right? So when you expel the carbon dioxide, when you release the carbon dioxide, so your chest region become small, right? So why it is like that? Because it is also because of the expel of the carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide, when it is removed from your body, the chest region become smaller, right? So this happens when the diaphragm back to the position. So diaphragm is represented here. So here there is a diaphragm. Okay, so this is a diaphragm. So when you breathe in, so the diaphragm become straight. So now it is curved like structure, right? So but when you breathe in, the chest region increase. So when you take in the oxygen, so the diaphragm becomes straight. So when you breathe out, again it is back to its position. So this is about the human respiratory system. So in this video, you can observe how the chest region increases and back to its position. Okay. So in the human beings, the oxygen is carried by the red blood cells. So red blood cells, they have the special pigment that is called as a hemoglobin. You know that red blood cells, RBC, that contain the hemoglobin that is able to carry the oxygen to the different parts of the body. And how the carbon dioxide is carried. So I explained, right? So oxygen, so that diffuse into the blood, and carbon dioxide is exchanged in the alveoli, like that I explained, right? So how this exchange takes place? The carbon dioxide is carried by the blood, but which part of the blood? So carbon dioxide is dissolved in plasma and it is carried to the lungs. So in the dissolved form, the carbon dioxide is carried. Okay. So this is what about the respiration, types of the respiration and human respiratory system. Okay, so that we studied. Next life process, that is the transportation. So there are four important life processes, that is nutrition. So that we studied in the last class, and today we studied about the respiration. And next one life process, that is the transportation. So transportation means, you know that transferring the something, some substances from one place to the another place, right? So in our day-to-day life also, we know about this word. This is the common word, transportation, right? So same transportation that takes place in our body or living organisms body. So transportation of what? So transportation of the food materials, nutrients, waste materials, that should be transferred from one place to the another place, right? So in plants body also, So there is a synthesis of the food in the leaves. So plant synthesize the food in their leaves, and that should be transported into the different parts of the plant's body, right? So same in the human body also, our digestive system, so that absorb the nutrients, so like glucose, proteins, carbohydrates, and different nutrients are absorbed in our digestive system, and that should be carried to the different part of our body. So how this transportation takes place? So first we are studying about the human transportation. So in human body, how transportation takes place. So here, very important, blood transport these all nutrients and the waste materials in our body. So blood, that is called as a fluid connective tissue. So blood is able to carry all the materials like oxygen and the waste materials and nutrients also. Many substances like salts and nutrients, they are carried by the blood, right? So this blood that contain the fluid medium, that is called as a plasma. So inside the plasma, so in this picture you can observe the blood. So these are the red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets are there. So these all cells are suspended inside the plasma. So here you can observe the white color substance, right? So that is nothing but a plasma. So in the plasma, these blood cells are suspended, right? So these white blood cells, red blood cells, and the platelets, so these are the main component of the blood. So this is nothing but a plasma. So inside the plasma, these all materials are present. So here the blood consists of the different particles like white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets, right? So here oxygen is carried by the, you know, that is by the red blood cells, right? Red blood corpuscles also it is called. And carbon dioxide is carried by the plasma. Plasma that carries the carbon dioxide, nitrogenous waste, and the some food materials. So here, so there is a question, oxygen is carried by the which blood cells? So that is by the red blood cells. And how the carbon dioxide is carried? So the question is like that, how oxygen and carbon dioxide is carried by the blood? So students, please note down the important points. Carbon dioxide is carried by the plasma. Okay. So there is an in our body, there is a need of one organ that should pump the blood to the different parts of our body. So blood itself, it is not able to travel, or it is not able to move from one part to the another part of our body, right? So blood should be pumped by some organ. So there is a need of some organ, that is nothing but a heart. So heart is a organ that helps to the pumping of the blood throughout our body. So what is the size of the our heart? So our heart size is equal to the left fist of our hand, right? So this diagram represents the schematic sectional view of the human heart. You know that human heart that contain the four important chambers. So now we are studying about the how the heart is able to pump the blood to the different parts of our body, because the blood should move inside our body because it is carrying the nutrients. So here our heart, human heart that contain the four chambered heart. So which are the four chambers? Human heart that contain the four chambers, that is the left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, and the right ventricle. So these are the four chambers. So here left and right part of the heart is separated by structure that is called as a septum. So here left and right part of the heart is separated by the septum, and there is also valves in between the atrium and the ventricle. So this is the chamber that is called as the atrium, and this is called as a ventricle, right? So there is a valve in between the atria and the ventricle in both left and right side of the heart. Okay, so here first thing is the four chambers of the heart. So next step, so what we are studying, how the blood is moving inside the heart. Okay, so here the oxygenated blood, so that is represented here in a pink color, and the deoxygenated blood that is represented in a blue color. Okay, so using this diagram, I'm going to explain the how the exchange of how the heart is able to pump the blood to the different parts of our body. Okay, here the left atrium that receives the oxygenated blood. So oxygenated blood that is received by the left atrium. So through the pulmonary veins, they are carrying the oxygenated blood to the left atrium. This oxygenated blood comes from where? From the lungs, right? So here lungs are there. From the lungs, the oxygenated blood that is carried to the heart by the pulmonary veins. So when the left atrium, so that receives the blood, so that should be pumped to the next part, right? So then the left atrium that contracts, when the left atrium contracts, the blood moves to the left ventricle. So then the ventricles relaxes. When it receives the blood from the left atrium, ventricle, so that start to contract. So when the left ventricle contracts, so this oxygenated blood, so that is moved in the aorta. So this is the aorta. So it is left ventricle is connected to the blood vessel, that is the aorta. So this aorta that is able to transport the blood to the different part of our body. So which required the oxygenated blood, right? So oxygen is required. So this oxygen is fulfilled by the blood. So this aorta pumps the oxygenated blood to the different parts of our body. Okay, so this is the first step. So in the first step, what happened? So once again, I'm going to explain. So the oxygenated blood from the lungs, so that is carried by the pulmonary veins and pour into the left atrium. Okay, so this left atrium contracts. When the left atrium contracts, these walls are open and the blood moves to the left ventricle. So when the left ventricle contracts, the blood that moves in the aorta, and this aorta able to carry the oxygenated blood to the different parts of our body. Okay, so this is the first step. The second step, the deoxygenated blood, so that is collected by the vena cava. So this vena cava, that, yes, any doubts?
No.
Okay, this vena cava that receives the deoxygenated blood. How the deoxygenated blood is formed? The deoxygenated blood is formed due to the cellular activities. Carbon dioxide is released. No. So that carbon dioxide containing blood is collected by the vena cava. So this is the vena cava that collects the deoxygenated blood from the lower body, and this vena cava that collects the deoxygenated from the upper part of our body. So now the deoxygenated blood is moving to the right atrium. So the right atrium, when it contracts, the blood moves to the ventricle. Okay, so when the ventricles contract, so that blood is moves in the pulmonary arteries. So these pulmonary arteries, what is the function of these pulmonary arteries? So they transfer the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. So this deoxygenated blood means which contain the carbon dioxide, right? So this carbon dioxide containing blood that is moving to the lungs. So in the lungs, what happens? Carbon dioxide is exchanged, right? Where? In the alveoli. So this carbon dioxide is exchanged and it will get oxygenated. The deoxygenated blood get oxygenated in the lungs. So if you know about the lungs, then only you can understand the transportation of the blood. Okay, so otherwise it is difficult to understand this part, because so already I explained how the exchange of the carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place in the alveoli. So this deoxygenated blood moves to the lungs, and in the lungs the carbon dioxide is removed and it will get oxygenated again, come to the body. So this is how the blood moves inside our body. Okay, so here also you can observe how the here blue color blood, so that represent the deoxygenated blood, and the red color that represent the oxygenated blood. So here you can observe the how the blood moves inside the ventricles and the atrium. Okay, so in the human body, so there is no mixing of the carbon dioxide blood and the oxygen rich blood, right? So why it is like that? Because heart contains the different chambers for the deoxygenated blood and the oxygenated blood. So there is no mixing of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood takes place. Okay, so this is the explanation. So what I explained before, oxygen rich blood that comes from the lungs, that comes to the left atrium. The left atrium relaxes and collecting the blood. When the left atrium contracts, it moves the blood to the next chamber. Which is the next chamber? That is nothing but a left ventricle, right? So when they receive the blood, they will get relaxed and the blood transfer to the next, that is the aorta. So the blood transfer to the aorta, that aorta transfer the blood to the different parts of our body. And the deoxygenated blood that comes from the body, so that is collected by the upper chamber. So that is called as a right atrium, right? So that right atrium receives the deoxygenated blood, and the right atrium that transfer the blood to the right ventricle. So the right ventricle that pumps the blood for the oxygenation to the lungs. Oxygenation of the blood will take place in the lungs. So here one of the important thing is ventricles. So they have the thick wall than the atrium. So these ventricles, so they are the lower chambers, right? So both right ventricle and the left ventricle, they have the thicker muscular wall. So why they have the thicker muscular wall? Because these ventricles, they should pump the blood to the different organs, right? So that should be pumped to the aorta and the pulmonary veins, right? So these walls are thick in the ventricles compared to the atria. So this is also very important thing. So that may ask in your exam. So why the ventricles have the thick muscular wall than the atrium? Okay. So this is the representation of the how the exchange of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide takes place. Okay, so in this diagram you can understand how the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange will takes place. So you know the four chambers: left atria, left ventricle, right atria, right ventricle, right? So here the oxygen, this is the lung, and these are the body cells, okay, different parts of our body. So here the lungs, so there is an exchange of the carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place, and the oxygen carrying blood, so that moves to the heart through the pulmonary veins. So these pulmonary veins, so they are carrying the blood to the atria, then to the ventricle. So ventricle to the aorta, that is carrying the blood to the body. So body cells. In the body cells, what happens? So body cells, they contain the glucose, right? So they contain the glucose. So this glucose breaks down. So when the glucose breaks down, when they receive the oxygen, oxygen is required for the breakdown of the glucose. When the oxygen is there, the glucose breakdown and it releases the energy. So energy is very important. So if we are doing any activity, means the energy is required. So how the energy is releasing? So you are watching the class and you are doing the different activities in your home and school, right? But how this energy is released in your body? So due to the breakdown of the glucose. How the glucose is breakdown? This glucose breakdown in the presence of the oxygen. So how the oxygen is coming inside? So that is by the respiration process. Okay. So here the glucose breaks down and it releases the energy plus one more waste product, that is the carbon dioxide, right? So this carbon dioxide is released here, and the carbon dioxide, how it is carried, so that should be expelled from our body, right? So this carbon dioxide that is carried by the blood, and this carbon dioxide containing blood is collected by the vena cava. Okay, so this vena cava pour the blood to the right atrium, then right ventricle. So this deoxygenated blood, so that is carrying the carbon dioxide, so directly it is not moving to the lungs, so it is moving to the heart. So from the heart it is moving to the lungs. So in the lungs, what happens? There is the exchange of the carbon dioxide, right? So this carbon dioxide is removed and the blood will get oxygenated. So this is how the exchange of the carbon dioxide and the oxygen takes place in our body. Okay, I hope you understood this concept. Very important, and understand this circle. So you can understand this very easily if you observe this picture and understand the topic very easily. Okay. So you know that in the mammals, so there is a exchange of the gases takes place, and both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood is separate. There is no mixing of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood. But so it is useful for the animals like birds and mammals, but there is a mixing of the blood will takes place in the lower organisms like amphibians and reptiles and fishes. Okay, so there is a mixing, means oxygenated and deoxygenated blood get mixed in these lower organisms, but there is no mixing of these blood takes place in the birds and animals. So why it is like that? It is very important, just listen to me, very important thing. Birds and mammals, they are maintaining their body temperature. So what is the human body temperature? That is 98.6. So humans are maintaining their body temperature. So they are called as warm blood animals, and birds also maintaining their temperature. So they are also warm blood animals. To maintain this body temperature, they need more energy. So this more energy supply is done by the oxygenated blood. But the reptiles and amphibians and fishes, there is no need of this much energy for the maintaining the temperature. They are called as a cold blood animals. I hope this you have studied in the ninth standard. The reptiles and the amphibians, they are called as cold blooded organisms. What do you mean by cold blooded? Are they having the cold blood? No, they are able to change their body temperature with the environment. So they can change their body temperature. If the environmental temperature is high, they are able to change the body temperature. So for this process, there is no need of the more energy. But the mammals and the birds, so they need more energy for the maintaining their body temperature. So they need oxygenated blood separately and deoxygenated blood separately. So this is the very important question. So this may ask in your board exam. Okay. So why it is useful in the animals? So there is a separation of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood. Okay, why it is useful for the animals and the birds, like that they ask. So give reason questions. Okay, very important. Okay, so fishes, you know that fishes already in ninth standard, so you have studied, they have the two chambered heart, right? So remaining amphibians and the reptiles, they have the three chambered, right, except the crocodile. So here there is a single circulation of the blood will takes place, but in the mammals, the blood, to complete the one circle, so it moves twice in the heart. So how it takes place in the heart? So there is a, to complete one cycle of the blood circulation, blood moves two times. Oxygenated blood moves and the deoxygenated blood moves in the heart. So these two movements of the blood, so that completes the one cycle. So it is called as a double circulation. So what is double circulation? So in the heart, blood goes through the heart twice during the each cycle. So in vertebrates, so this is called as a double circulation. Okay, so this double circulation takes place in the birds and mammals, and in fishes there is a single circulation of blood will takes place, because in fishes only two chamber heart is present. Okay, so this is about the blood circulation. So I hope you understood this concept. Now I'm moving to the next part of this blood circulation. So when the blood moves from the heart, so this blood, so that is carried by the arteries. So arteries, they are carry the blood away from the heart. So these arteries, they are carrying the blood away from the heart, means they are carrying the blood to the different organs, right? So this blood emerges in with a high pressure. So these arteries have thick elastic walls. So these arteries, they are carrying the blood, oxygenated blood, to the different parts of the body, and this blood emerges with the high pressure. To maintain the high pressure, these arteries have the thick and elastic walls. And the veins, they collect the deoxygenated blood and bring back it to the heart. So there is no need to a thick walls, because there is no high pressure. So walls of the veins, they are not very thick, but the walls of the arteries, they are very thick. So what is the reason behind this? Because arteries carry the high pressure blood to the different parts of the body, and the veins, they are carrying the deoxygenated blood to the heart. So they are carrying the deoxygenated blood to the heart, so which is not having the high pressure. So that is in a low pressure. Okay. So this is why arteries and veins are different. So this is the artery and this is the vein. So these veins, these arteries, they are carrying the oxygenated blood that is in a red color. So this artery carrying the blood to the different parts of our body, and this is a blue color that is the vein. That vein carrying the blood, deoxygenated blood to the heart. So both arteries and veins are different. How they are different? Because of the cell wall. So their wall. So their walls have the thick, arteries walls are thick because they should carry the high pressure blood. Okay. So these arteries, they became small walls. Here you can observe the picture. So this is the artery and it will become branched like this. So they are called as a capillaries. So these capillaries, so this is the blood vessel and it will become small branches, that is nothing but a capillaries. So these capillaries that reach the each cell of our body, that supply the oxygenated blood to the every cell or every tissue of our body. So these are small walls are nothing but a capillaries. So the smallest vessels have walls, so they are called as a capillaries, and these capillaries again become join and form the veins. So these capillaries, they are reaching the cells, and these cells, they are releasing the carbon dioxide, so that also moves in the capillary. Again they will join and form the vein, and this vein carries the deoxygenated blood to the heart. So like this, the artery and veins and capillaries are working. So this is the extra point, additional knowledge point. So I hope you heard the word blood pressure, BP, right? So what is this blood pressure? So blood pressure is nothing but the force that blood exert against the walls of the vessel is called as a blood pressure. So here the blood is moving in the blood vessel. So this blood that exert the pressure inside this blood vessel, so that is nothing but a blood pressure. So this blood pressure is greater in arteries than the veins. So what is the reason behind this? The blood pressure is greater in arteries than in the veins, because the arteries, they are carrying the high pressure blood. So that is pumped from the blood. So they are carrying the blood to the different cells, right? So these veins, they are carrying the deoxygenated blood. So that is not having the high pressure. So here, what is this high BP and low BP? How it is measured? So the blood pressure of the inside the artery during the ventricular systole. So when the ventricles contract, so that pressure is called as a systolic pressure. So contraction, relaxation, you know that. Contraction and the relaxation. So when the ventricles contract, the blood inside the artery, so the blood which is carrying the oxygenated blood, the blood inside the artery, so that is known as a systolic pressure. And the ventricular diastole, so that is nothing but when the ventricles are in a relaxation, so the blood pressure in the artery during the relaxation of the ventricle. So that is called as a diastolic pressure. So when the ventricles contract, the blood moves in the arteries. So this is a systolic pressure. When the ventricles relaxes, the blood that is carrying by the artery, so that is also relaxes. So that is the ventricular diastole. So normal systolic pressure is 120 mmHg. So it is measured like that. Hg means, so that is a measuring of this blood pressure, 120 mmHg, and diastolic pressure, so that is 80 mmHg. So normal blood pressure is 120 over 80. So that is the normal blood pressure of the human being. So 120 means that is the systolic pressure, means systolic contraction. And when the heart relaxes, when the ventricles relaxes, the pressure should be, that should be 80. So this is how the blood pressure is measured. So this blood pressure that is measured by one instrument that is called as a sphygmomanometer. So this is the picture of this sphygmomanometer. So this is used to measure the blood pressure, so which is high or low. So high blood pressure that cause the different effects on our body. So the normal blood pressure should be there in our body. Okay. So this is how the heart pumps the blood, and the different methods of the blood transportation in the heart. Okay, how the oxygenated blood, deoxygenated blood transport in the heart. So this last topic about this transportation in the human beings, that is the lymph. So what is that lymph? So lymph is nothing but that is a tissue fluid. So what is this tissue fluid? So it is another type of the, this is another type of the transportation fluid. So that helps for the transportation of the nutrients. Other than the blood, there is one more fluid, that is a lymph. So how this lymph is forming and what is the function of lymph? So this lymph that carries the some proteins, plasma and other materials to the different parts of the body. And how it is formed, this lymph? So lymphs, when the capillaries, so they are, so this is the capillary, just imagine this is the capillary. So it is carrying the blood, so that is carrying the oxygenated blood, right? So you know the capillary, when the blood vessels, they will branch into small, so they form the capillaries, right? So inside the capillary there is a blood. So these walls of the capillaries, so they are able to release some blood particles to the intercellular space. So some particles from the blood, so they drain out from the walls of this capillary. So these walls of capillary, so it is very thin, and some blood particles, they are drained out and collected in a intercellular space. So that is nothing but a lymph. So I hope how the lymph is produced, you understood. It is formed by the blood, but it is drained out. So some blood cells, they are coming out from the pores of the cell wall. So that forms the lymph. And this lymph, so that is colorless. Why it is colorless? Because from these pores of the cell wall, only WBC and some protein can come out, but there is no chance of the coming out of the RBC. So this lymph is colorless because there is no presence of the RBC. So the lymph that does not contain the RBC, so it is a colorless fluid. So this fluid also carrying the some nutrients, proteins, and some digested fats also carried by this lymph. So this lymph, so that also forms the lymphatic vessels. So that intercellular fluid that is forming the one system that is called as a lymphatic system. So the lymph is again carried by some vessels. Okay, so the lymph is formed by the blood, and this is also carried by the some vessels. They are called as a lymph vessels, and these lymph vessels are again connected to the heart. So this is also carrying the some materials like proteins and the digested or absorbed fat from the intestine to the heart. So this is how the lymph is also called as a tissue fluid, and it is also able to transport the some materials from our body to the another part of the body. Okay, so today we studied about the respiration, types of the respiration. So very important, respiration and the types of the respiration: aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So how the aerobic and anaerobic respiration takes place in the different organisms, and schematic representation of that is very important, and the difference is very important. Okay, then about the human respiratory system. In the human respiratory system, so there is important part, that is the alveoli. So how the exchange of the gases takes place in the alveoli and different parts of the human respiratory system, that is very important. And next part, that is the transportation. In transportation, how the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood is carried by the heart. So these all points that we studied in today's class. So write down the questions. Students, please note down the questions and try to answer for these questions. So first question is, what advantage over an aquatic organisms does a terrestrial organism have with regard to obtaining the oxygen for respiration? So already I explained, the terrestrial organisms, they have the more oxygen on the terrestrial system, but the aquatic organisms, they have less dissolved or oxygen for their respiration. And second question is, what are the different ways in which glucose is oxidized to provide the energy in various organisms? So this is aerobic and anaerobic respirations you have to explain. All three methods you have to explain. How is oxygen and carbon dioxide transported in human beings? So oxygen, how it is carried, and carbon dioxide, how it is carried. And fourth question is, how are the lungs designed in human beings to maximize the area for the exchange of gases? So that is, you have to explain about the alveoli. Okay. So thank you, students. If you have any doubts, you can ask. You can drop the message here. Okay. Okay. Thank you, students. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the next class. Just thank you.